Let's get into some of the accomplishments here of what I would consider the greatest president, certainly of my lifetime. And again, I'm a Reagan baby. So you have unemployment was less than 4%, the lowest in almost half a century, yet an inflation rate that fell to 1%, which actually beat even the projected targets and expectations of the Federal Reserve at the time. Yet mortgage rates reach an all-time low, even hitting under 3%. The portion of Americans living below the poverty line declined to the lowest level in recorded history. The wealth of American households, including, of course, their stocks, their portfolios, their savings, their investments, even their real estate, was the highest level in history, the lowest Black unemployment rate ever recorded in history, the lowest Hispanic rate ever recorded in history, more women working and having jobs as CEOs and presidents of companies than any other time in history. Trump has a history, of course, of promoting women into high positions. Of course, you had the lower gas prices, you had energy independence, you had opportunity zones. I mean, you had the highest labor participation rate since 1969. So again, I don't see, and I think most historians and most people that right now are completely broke and can't get a job and can't rent and can't put gas in their car and can't afford groceries because of inflation. Wait, hang on. You had your chance to speak. It's now mine. And so all of these people certainly feel as though the Trump years were a hell of a lot better than what we got now. Welcome back to the program. My guest today is a former U.S. representative and the director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Reagan administration. He is the author of several controversial books, including his latest, Trump's War on Capitalism. Please welcome David Stockman to the program. David, how are you doing today?
Very good, and happy to be with you. And we got some important issues and topics to cover. So let's plunge right in, I guess.
We certainly do. There's a lot of interesting things to talk about. And I want to start out, of course, with your book, but I want to kind of talk about some other books, perhaps, that you have written as well. You've written books such as The Undrainable Swamp, The Fantasy of MAGA, Why the Reagan Revolution Has Failed, and your latest, of course, is Trump's War on Capitalism. With most analysts in history saying that the Trump economy was one of the best that we've ever seen in recorded history, where exactly is the former president's war on capitalism?
Well, it's exactly because he was not remotely an economic conservative. He was the biggest spender that we've ever had in the Oval Office, including LBJ and FDR. During his 4 years, the public debt went from 20 trillion to 28 trillion. That's an 8 trillion gain, almost unimaginable in a short period of time. It took the first 216 years of the American Republic, 43 presidents, to come up with 8 trillion. Trump did it in 4 years. The deficit averaged 9% of GDP on his watch, 3 times more than normal, even double what Obama had, who was the biggest spender before that. Trump was constantly on the case of the Fed for even lower interest rates and easier money. That's not conservative. That's Keynesian, statist economics. So overall, he had, I say in the book, the great virtue Trump has is he had all the right enemies. The establishment doesn't like him. The deep state was against him. CNN was constantly on his case. Washington Post, Wall Street, New York Times, and so forth. But he had the wrong policies. These are basically more of the same, and we're never going to get out of a $34 trillion debt crisis that's heading towards 50 trillion. We're never going to end both the bubbles on Wall Street, the inflation on Main Street, unless we get the Fed under control. Trump is not interested. He did talk about bringing the empire home, or America first. That was all good rhetoric, but what did he do? He took a bloated defense budget of $600 billion that he got from Obama and raised it to $750 billion, far more than anything that could be justified. So the point of my book is to alert well-intended, earnest Republicans and conservatives and MAGA supporters to the fact that Trump isn't nearly what he says he is. He is not a solution to the swamp. He didn't drain it. He filled it even further. And the whole idea, to the point that you mentioned, and I'll stop and we can go into it, that he had the greatest economy ever is completely a myth. And I think people need to understand what the real facts are, because if you look at them, you will see that this is so much political boasting and rhetoric that isn't, backed up by the hard facts of economic life.
Okay. So first and foremost, the majority of that spending was due to the Democrats working with the Chinese because they couldn't beat Trump. And they said, hey, I tell you what, we'll give you the White House if you drop this virus and get rid of Trump and his rallies and destroy his economy. Even after that happened, he still was able to rebound and was still on the projection to re-election, which again, if you believe most of the analysts that I have talked to, including people like Mike Lindell, the final numbers by 10 o'clock on election night were 425 electoral votes to 118. But that's a story for another day. Let's get into some of the accomplishments here of what I would consider the greatest president, certainly of my lifetime. And again, I'm a Reagan baby. So you have unemployment was less than 4%, the lowest in almost half a century. Yet an inflation rate that fell to 1%, which actually beat even the projected targets and expectations of the Federal Reserve at the time. Yet mortgage rates reached an all-time low, even hitting under 3%. The portion of Americans living below the poverty line declined to the lowest level in recorded history. The wealth of American households, including, of course, their stocks, their portfolios, their savings, their investments, even their real estate, was the highest level in history. The lowest Black unemployment rate ever recorded in history, the lowest Hispanic rate ever recorded in history. More women working and having jobs as CEOs and presidents of companies than any other time in history. Trump has a history, of course, of promoting women into high positions. Of course, you had the lower gas prices, you had energy independence, you had opportunity zones. I mean, you had the highest labor participation rate since 1969. So again, I don't see, and I think most historians and most people that right now are completely broke and can't get a job and can't rent and can't put gas in their car and can't afford groceries because of inflation. Wait, hang on. You had your chance to speak. It's now mine. And so all of these people certainly feel as though the Trump years were a hell of a lot better than what we got now.
Well, okay, I don't know who caused the virus. Probably it was the lab leak from Wuhan. But the virus didn't cause the economy to crater in April of 2020. The lockdowns did. Dr. Fauci and the malpracticing doctors were sent out there to scare the living daylights out of the American people. They did that every day from the bully pulpit of the White House, the Oval Office. Trump endorsed it all. He tolerated it all. He enabled it all. The shutdown is on his watch. He has to take accountability for it. And as a result of that, the economy ended up in very bad shape, one. And second, he then added $6.5 trillion to government spending in order to bail out the economy. Yes, he did. 2.2.
The Democrats actually did that, but that's a story.
No. He signed
sure they
bills.
did.
Hey,
well, I know, but look at the $1 trillion worth of economic recovery.
You wanted me to talk about this and talk about the book. He signed the bills that made this possible. The CARES Act, $2.2 trillion, signed 11 days after it was first put on the table, sight unseen, 2.3 trillion. Then in December, he signed another 2 trillion of more COVID relief, bailouts, free stuff, checks to 90% of the households, unemployment toppers. Trump signed all that. In the election of 2020, he said we need another 2,000 handouts to have most of the public population. That got enacted by Biden, but it was his idea in March. So you put all that together, and we had an inflationary firestorm coming out of the budget. And then we had Trump telling the Fed, print the money, monetize the debt, buy up all the bonds so that we can spend all this money and bail out an economy that I'm shutting down in a totally unconstitutional, anti-free market way. That's what really happened. Now, before that, pretend it, the virus didn't come, the lockdowns didn't happen. Even before that, the budget deficit, which was down to about 500 billion when he took office, was back up to $1 trillion a year in 2019 before there was any virus or bailouts or lockdown. He marched the budget deficit in the wrong direction, and that's not what a Republican is supposed to do. A Republican is supposed to correct the mess made by the big spending Democrats. He made it worse. All of those numbers that you mentioned about the performance of the economy, Trump didn't do that. American capitalism did that. Workers did that.
No. See, I respectfully disagree.
I will strongly disagree.
And I absolutely disagree
with you.
Yeah.
His policies did not cause.
What about TARP 1? What about TARP 2? What about the open border policies before him? What about the fact that he made us energy independent in less than a year and a half? Never been done in the history of the United States. What about the fact that he had to spend, unfortunately, this money? And I agree with you. He should have He should have never shut down the economy. I totally am in agreement with you, because we didn't have a real virus. Okay,
that's right.
Okay, good. I'm glad that we agree with that, because he should have never listened to Dr. Falsey, as I call him on my show, because
this is fine, but we need to understand that Donald Trump is a spender. He has no worries.
He's not a spender. He's not a spender. His Congress was spending the money. Wait a minute,
listen to me. He passed a $1.7 trillion tax.
He never should have done it. I agree, because it was a bailout.
Cuts. Now, I've been saying my whole adult life, going all the way back to the Reagan days, and Reagan actually was the greatest president, not Donald Trump.
No, I disagree with that, but we'll get into that.
Going all the way back to that time, I've been saying, if you want to cut taxes, we must. It's good for the economy. It's good for incentives, but you got to cut spending too. You can't just borrow the money. Trump did exactly that. It was the wrong thing. It didn't work. It paid. Where do you think this inflation came from? Biden didn't invent it. The Fed did. Why did the Fed produce all this inflation? Because they were monetizing all the debt that was being created by the Trump administration and the Congress, the uniparty, the spenders in both parties who were.
That's true. There are spenders in both parties. You're absolutely correct.
The Republican Party is as bad on the spending front as the Democrats. The Republicans want to spend on war, the Democrats on welfare. You got war and welfare together, bulging the budget, and we're borrowing the money, and we're burrowing future generations in debt that they'll never be able to cope with. Those are the problems. So
there's $34 trillion in debt. The majority of that debt was not by Trump. That's number one. Number two, the majority of the debt that you're referring to, I would agree with you. We never had a pandemic. We had a plandemic. This was an opportunity. This was an opportunity to remove Trump and his great policies, because he kept his promises, from office. And I believe both parties worked together because they didn't like him. They didn't want him to be in office. They're doing it to him now. That's what's going on with these BS indictments and all that. I think the American people understand that they were much better and well off under a President Trump that kept the economy moving in historic fashion. Now, you mentioned your work in the Reagan administration. You have been considered one of the more controversial OMD OMB directors that have been appointed.
Yeah.
But you've also been called the father of Reaganomics and helped pass Reagan's supply side economics budget. And here's my question. Most historians will say that the Reagan policies were very good policies, certainly not until President Trump came along and blew them out of the water. But regardless of that, are you basically saying that because you were, I guess, run out of the Reagan administration in 1985, you then wrote a book that was titled The Failures of Reaganomics? So are you contradicting your own policies that you helped put forward?
No, I'm saying the policies were the right one. We tried to shrink the welfare state. We tried to take the budget, which was already like 23% of GDP, down substantially. The problem is none of that happened. The Republicans were unwilling to cut domestic spending. The Pentagon and the defense and the war hawks got a tripling of the defense budget during the same years that we were cutting taxes and failing to cut domestic spending. As a result, the execution was a failure, not the ideas, not the plan, not the supply side notion of hard money, low tax rates, encouragement for enterprise, and all the other things that make free market capitalism work. All of that was right. The execution was a failure. We ended up with $3 trillion of debt when we had less than $1 trillion of public debt when we started in January 1981. And I've been saying ever since, we have to learn the lesson. Running a government in a conservative way, implementing supply side is a tough business politically, and you can't go around, satisfying all the interest groups and the lobbies and, all of the people that want free stuff and handouts from government and expect to succeed. And unfortunately, Trump took the easy route. He took the easy route of dishing out the money by the trillions. And as a result of that, and he shut down the economy, ignored the Constitution. And because of that, I strongly believe he doesn't deserve a second term. Not that Biden's any better, Biden's worse. But I would rather see a 2024 election blow up, Bobby Kennedy, who I support, come into the, the battle, cause a stalemate in the Electoral College, bring the election to the U.S. House for the first time in 200 years, and, force a big change in policy. We need to bring the empire home. We need to dramatically cut the warfare state and the foreign aid spending and all the rest of it, and get our financial house in order. We're not going to do that as long as Trump and Biden.
Certainly not going to do that by spending money in Ukraine and doing all these other things, right?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so I think that we agree on at least one or two things here.
Yeah.
In 2022, you called Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky in particular a clown. You also said that Ukraine brought the Russian invasion attack upon itself by poking the bear. Look, I'll tell you point blank that both of these men, Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, are not good guys, okay? I'll be the first to tell you that. I certainly believe that Putin, former KGB agent, wants to bring the old guard back together. He wants the old Soviet nations back together. I get it. I understand that. But from that standpoint, there is no bigger, more corrupt country in Western Europe than Ukraine. Ukraine are the ones that did Russia, Russia, Russia. It was never Russia, Russia, Russia. It was Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. We know that Ukraine is holding this illegitimate administration hostage because they know where all the bodies are buried. They know where the corruption is, all the payoffs, Burisma, all the other things. And so what's happening is we have a compromised, illegitimate White House that is funneling money to their biggest ally to protect themselves from having this information come out publicly. And therefore, we're spending taxpayer money and dollars to fight an unwinnable, unethical, and unmoral war against a nuclear Russian superpower, all because they want to get into NATO and gain even more power. So I would agree with you. Now, we may not agree with the execution on everything and how things are being done, but let me ask you this. How would you end the war in Ukraine if you had the ability to do so?
Well, I would recognize that this is a civil and territorial war in the foothills of the old Russian Empire, that the part that is broken away from the Ukrainian government in Kiev is Russian speaking, the Donbass, the areas around the Black Sea. It was always called Novorossiya. That means New Russia. It was part of Russia. The state that now exists, the borders were created at the end of a barrel of a gun by Lenin, Stalin, and Khrushchev. There was never any Ukraine with its current borders until 1922 when the communists created it. And so here we are spending billions and tens of billions running up to the brink of a nuclear war in order to recreate or to save the state created by communist dictators who've long since passed, thankfully, from this earthly life. So what the hell are we doing? The way to solve it is to let it partition. The people in the Donbass in the south have never wanted to be together with the people in the west, and let them divide. If you look at every election, I've written about all this in my blog, every election since 1991 have voted 80-20 one way in the east and 80-20 the other way in the west. They don't want to be together. It's not a nation built to last. So have a peace conference, partition the country, and move on. You don't need to be spending all this money. You don't need to be testing all these weapons, and you don't need to be killing all these hundreds of thousands of people, to say nothing of running the risk of a nuclear confrontation. And once we do that and begin to tell the American people that the world is not some place where we're totally in danger of being overcome or invaded, we can begin to drastically cut back this huge defense budget. $900 billion is crazy, and get our fiscal house in order.
See, now that is something that we agree on. Stop spending money in Ukraine, stop giving them unfettered, weapons and everything else to continue on, poking the bear, as you correctly pointed out. So I do agree with you in that respect. Now, here's the flip side of this. I am a protectionist. I think that nationalism is, of course, much better for the world and for security than globalism, clearly. And so one of the things that you had an issue with Trump was, of course, the trade policies, being a protectionist and things like that. But those policies have actually now weakened China to a point in which, of course, you have their middle class laying down, is what it's called. You have over 177,000 businesses, restaurants going under. So their economy is imploding. Now, a lot of people are saying that they're doing it on purpose, believe it or not, because they understand that you can't have communism and capitalism. And so they have chosen to save the party, the CCP, over capitalism. And so they're actually, a lot of people and analysts are saying that they're actually imploding their own economy, which I think is insane, but that's what they're doing. But again, these protectionist policies has made us safer. It has made us a better nation. And of course, if we would have finished the border wall, we wouldn't be having the invasion that we're having on the southern border. So let me ask you this. You did mention that you do like Bobby Kennedy, and I think he's a noble statesman. I think he's a good person. He's a good patriot. He's been right on a lot of things as far as, the vaccines and things of that nature. Who would you want to see if you had to choose a quote unquote Republican? What type of Republican in your mold would you like to see running the country?
The guy who knows what needs to be done abroad and at home, who has sound economics, sound money, non-intervention foreign policy, is Rand Paul. Rand Paul is more knowledgeable. He's more courageous. He's more, in tune with all the things that are wrong in America today than any Republican in Washington, hands down. So he should be the candidate. He should be the president. But, he doesn't even have a snowball's chance because all these Republicans have decided, they're going to become Trumpites. And I just think compared to Rand Paul, Donald Trump couldn't hold a candle to Rand Paul in terms of what we really need to do in this country.
I do like a lot of Rand Paul's positions. He isn't. He's not an interventionist. He's more of a protectionist. He's been after, of course, Dr.
Fauci,
Fauci.
yeah, yeah.
Of course, he's done great things with that. And he's called out this absolutely horrific deal that they're working on in the Senate, which hopefully is not going to pass, which of course is giving no money to the southern border and just paying off, Ukraine and Israel and Gaza and, all these others. I mean, we're not even protecting our own borders. Now we have investigations that are showing that even the cartels are paying off the police and the border patrol to look the other way. I don't know if you saw James O'Keefe's latest expose was phenomenal. He pretended to be a homeless person, and he goes down to Tucson and he found a Ramada that was transformed into a migrant center, and he got a couple of migrants that infiltrated it. And it's pretty scary to see that, we have these people that have infiltrated to this country, and now we have unabated, open borders. I believe the number is probably 62 million illegal aliens at this point. Unsustainable, of course, numbers. But again, they're doing this on purpose. The Great Replacement theory is real. There's no question about it. We can clearly see what's happening. So I agree with Rand Paul and a lot of his protectionist policies. I also think that President Trump has a lot of those protectionist policies as well. Again, he was listening to the panic porn coming from the prostitutes in the media, coming from Fauci, coming from so many others saying, if you don't shut down the country, millions upon millions of Americans are going to die, which of course was not the truth. Yeah, right. We know that Fauci is a liar, clearly. I mean, Bobby Kennedy, clearly, Robert Kennedy showed that in his book, The Real Dr. Fauci and others. So I think that President Trump, listened, and I agree with you, he listened to the wrong people. I would say there's two things that he was terrible at: picking cabinet members and listening to some of the wrong advisors. Hopefully, if he is reelected, which hopefully he is, he'll be smarter on the second time.
I hope so too. But remember, when someone says, I'm for America first, and they appoint to their top two national security positions John Bolton, who's the biggest interventionist neocon warmonger to come out of Washington in decades, and Mike Pompeo to run the CIA and then the State Department, who's even worse, then you get to an issue of judgment. Maybe he's learned a lot. I hope he has.
Right.
What we need to understand is that China is not a, overwhelming threat to the United States. It's not going to be landing troops on the, shores of California. Their economy is a house of cards. It's a Ponzi.
Correct. I agree with you.
It's built on 50 trillion of debt. So we need to simply let it fall apart, just like the Soviet Union did in the late 1980s. And we don't need to be arming ourselves and putting on all kinds of bad policies because somehow we think we have to stop, the Chinese threat. So,
there's one part that I would probably disagree with. I do believe that China is an existential threat to not just the United States, but to all humanity, because not only one Wuhan lab is out there, they're building another 6 or 7 more. And you have to understand that I believe, as many believe, that the COVID situation was a test run. Can we release this virus and change the trajectory and behavior of every single world citizen in a very short amount of time? Maybe it won't kill everybody right away. Maybe it'll take years. And if not, then we'll have the vaccines that'll come in and depopulate the rest of the world that doesn't die from this, barely even lethal disease. But let's see what we can do. And then if they're not stopped, what is the next virus going to be? I've interviewed Gordon Chang in the past. I know him. He said that China's working on gene-specific viruses that can attack Caucasian genes. I know this sounds crazy science fiction type of stuff, but it's not. So I wonder what they're even going to do. I mean, is it a possibility there might not even be an election? In your opinion, do you think that the threat from Trump and his protectionist America first, keeping his promises policies would be too much for the entrenched establishment and the deep state in Washington and the rest of the country to even trust the voters to go out there and vote? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the election in 2020, unfortunately, was badly corrupted by 64 million absentee ballots and same-day voting that you can't possibly regulate and maintain good order and integrity when you do that. And that, of course, came as a result of all the hysteria about the COVID and the lockdowns. But in a sense, Trump brought it on himself because he's the one that put the lockdowns in place. And
I would agree that the reason he lost the election,
but let's just say
had it stolen,
hopefully we learned our lesson from that one, and that we won't let it happen again. I don't see that happening in 2024. But I do see something else happening, and that is that no one wins the Electoral College, and that we go to the House of Representatives where we vote by state delegation, not by numbers, and therefore Wyoming has the same vote of California.
Right, correct.
And maybe out of that crisis, it'll be considered a great crisis. We might get some, sanity into the mix, into the decisions about what our policies are going to be and who the president's going to be next time around. So that's I think pretty much where we're going to have to limit it, because I sort of running out of time in terms of.
The last thing I'll say is, as far as January 6th is concerned, that's exactly what should have happened. It should have went to the House of Representatives, where you're right, they all have one vote and Trump would have come out. But the backup plan was the Fedsurrection on January 6th. Look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. On November 3rd, that was indeed the true insurrection. January 6th was the cover-up of the November 3rd insurrection, and they needed a backup plan, and that backup plan was January 6th. No way can we allow them to go to the House of Representatives and do their due diligence and pick President Trump, which would have won by a couple of votes. All I can say at this point is I'm glad that that RFK Jr. is running in this race as an independent. I hope that he gets 15, 18, even 20% of the electoral vote in this country. And if he can do that, I think that President Trump is going to be in a very strong position to win in 2024. But of course, time will tell.
Exactly.
David, thank you so much for being on the program. The guest is David Stockman. The book is Trump's War Against Capitalism. Where can folks go to find the book?
On Amazon or in bookstores. So in all the usual places.
Okay. Thank you again for being on the program, and good luck to you. God bless.
You too. You too. Okay, great.
Hey, Josh Bernstein here, America's favorite bald badass. Did you know that Bill O'Reilly charges $6.95 a month to see his content? Or how about the Blaze TV, who charges $10 a month? Or you could always subscribe to the Ben Shapiro podcast at $12 a month. But if you are looking for the best value and the most hardest hitting news, you've come to the right spot. Because here at JoshBernsteinUncensored.com, we drop the most jaw-dropping stories 7 days a week, starting at only $3 a month. So please head on over to the new releases tab, become an exclusive member of the Badass Nation, and join the fight to save this country with one of America's most hated, feared, and censored conservative voices. Remember, if it's banned on social media, you'll find it here. God bless.